to Abby Rose of Vidacycle, who many of you will also know from the fantastic Farmarama. So hi, Abby, and I think you're talking from the perspective of both farming perspective and also as a tech entrepreneur. And so let's hear your reflections, please. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tom. And yeah, thanks for everything that's been said so far, really. And I guess the first thing to reiterate, and everyone said it, is that technology is just part of the picture. This is a systemic issue and we require systemic shifts. And I can see technology, obviously, I believe it plays a part in that shift, but it's not the whole picture. And I think, yeah, it was great that the report really reiterated that this idea of a silver bullet solution is a total misnomer. If we think about some of the core principles of agroecology, it's all about diversity. And so I think someone did comment this earlier, that we need to think about all of these solutions kind of as a web of diverse options of how this is all going to sew together, and not that one of these solutions is going to really make everything better. And I think one of my first reflections, and this was highlighted in some of the risks in the report, was this is something I've come up against in my kind of tech experience, is that a lot of the technical advances that are happening today and the agri-tech that's evolving is based on whatever the industrial agricultural data has provided. So a lot of a lot of the machine learning and the satellite data has all been trained on industrial agricultural data. And so we find ourselves in these situations where, because the agroecological world has not been so involved in the technology side of things, we actually get completely boxed out. And that as the technology develops, agroecology gets further and further sidelined away from what, there's no machine learning algorithms that support agroecological satellite data or satellite allocation of, this field is an agroforestry field with this type of population wheat in it, for example. Like, the algorithms don't exist for that because there isn't the data to train them on it. And so I think this report is really important because actually, from my perspective, it's vital that that agroecology is part of, the technology that's being built. And I do think there are great benefits to be had from using some of this technology, as is outlined in the report. And I think it's exciting to see what the Soil Association Exchange is doing with some of the satellite data and applying that to agroecological systems, and how can we use that to really improve and create widespread adoption of agroecology. So yeah, I guess my first point was it's really vital that the agroecological community does get involved. Have I already finished my time, Tom? Oh no.
No. I thought you were making winding up noises. That's why I came back on. Carry on.
No, so that was just the first point. And then I think the next thing that I really got from I was glad the report highlighted, is that most technology that's created, once it reaches the farm, it's already kind of like boxed up and presented to you. And then farmers are required to adapt to the technology. And I see, again, for me, that's always been a massive disadvantage for agroecological farmers, because almost always that technology has been developed with other ideas in mind. And so I think the focus in the report on building, starting with farmer knowledge and very practical innovation, where the farmer is involved from the very, very beginning, is vital if we want to see agroecological technological innovation. So I think that's really exciting. And one thing that maybe, I think it was there in the report, but I think it could have been brought out further, is the importance of empowering farmers. And I think that, technology, if it's taking power away from farmers, then I think immediately it's not an agroecological technology. Because, as has been already noted, like, agroecology is knowledge intensive. So the people behind the farming, on our farm, like, we really need to know a lot about the farm in order to make it work, and every single farm is different. And so the technology has to be about empowering the farmer and helping them build their knowledge of that location, rather than, I see a lot of technology out there which is about kind of trying to figure stuff out for the farmer. And I often think that it's a difficult balance. So I guess, if we don't want to create these huge power asymmetries where the technology holds all the value and the farmer is kind of just a lemon or a sheep that follows all the rules of the technology, then I think I wanted to draw attention to the appendix of the report. If you do read it, I think the appendix that shows the kind of outcomes from the farmer inquiry day, I think some of the points in that are actually some of the most important points in the whole document. And in particular, the points around market dynamics and power. And I think that ultimately technology and bringing technology that actually supports agroecological innovation, both on the environmental and the social side, actually it's a lot about power. And I think one of the questions that wasn't asked in the whole report was, who are the investors behind the technology? Or where is the investment coming from? And what is their requirement or need? Are they looking for a 10x exit strategy to sell to, some, like, there were examples where John Deere and Monsanto had both, accumulated many different tech companies, and therefore they suddenly own all this data and they're amalgamating power again. So it's like, how do we avoid that issue? And I think I do have some thoughts on that. Like, there's more and more of a move towards steward-owned businesses, or, like, as a bare minimum, if a business is a B Corp, so at least it's not solely accountable to financial profit. I think that actually the governance structure of any businesses or private actors in the space is something that we really is like at the core of technology and the technological advances that are going on. And if we don't pay attention to that, then no matter how good the technology is, if it's still being driven by profit incentives, ultimately I feel like we'll end up in the same path. So I think, another good example from that was that farmers were saying, well, the technology developers must accept liability when issues occur, that risk should not be pushed onto farmers. And I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that's such a good point. And there's no technology developer out there who is saying, oh, yeah, we accept full risk, or, we accept full liability for the risks imposed by any recommendations we make from this technology. So I just think, how can we balance that power structure inherently in the technology, in the companies that are bringing this technological innovation? And I just had one final point, Tom, which is just that I think the one thing in the report that did sort of embed this in it just by its nature was the biological controls. And I thought it was really interesting that the biological controls require a mindset shift, which I think is a vital part of the whole agroecological transition, and that they're optimized when they're produced locally. And so that inherently means that you can't have this kind of centralized control in the same way. So I thought that was interesting, and how can we have more of that embedded into these models?
Fantastic. I mean, brilliant insights and really helpful